Thank you all for sticking through to the last panel of the day. First two panels will be a hard act to follow, but we'll do our best. I'm joined by two just leaders in election administration, two outstanding election officials, former election officials, who've stayed in this field, and I'm fortunate to say two very good friends. To my immediate left is Matt Crane, former Arapahoe County, Colorado clerk, who now is the director of the Colorado County Clerks Association. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And to his left, Bill Gates, as he often says, the other Bill Gates.
Thanks for getting that out.
Yeah, I will. The former member of the Maricopa County, Arizona Board of Supervisors, who now runs the Mechanics of Democracy Lab at Arizona State University. We honestly, with these two guys up here, we could probably have a conversation for 8 hours. We're not going to do that to you. We're going to talk for an hour and then go to Q&A. You know, one of the things that really struck me as we heard the previous panels was, especially on the last panel, the discussion of how primaries are done in Texas. With we heard Kristen say the one thing she'd like is more control, much to make primaries more like general elections. And we heard about this is the party's election, and there are different processes. What are the two of your reactions to that when you hear it?
I was just sort of shuddering in the back. I can't imagine what that would be like. I by the way, I mean, how I got started in elections was over 20 years ago. I served as a Republican election lawyer. I was the guy who ran the poll observers for the party, and so I come from that background. But as things have changed with the Republican Party in Maricopa County, I don't even think it would be possible for us to coordinate those efforts. And by the way, we have a Republican recorder, and so the duties are split between Board of Supervisors and a recorder in Maricopa County. 5 of the 6 of those people are Republicans, and I still think it would be nearly impossible. So I have great respect that you guys are able to make this work. But I just it would not work in Maricopa County.
And before I go to you, Matt, I mean, I want everyone to understand. I mean, when I started off, I said Texas is somewhat unique in how it approaches primary elections. A lot of the things that Texans just take for granted, in that these are run by the parties, that there are different processes in place that the parties have absolute control over, that general elections and primary elections don't look anything alike from a process perspective. That's foreign to pretty much every other state in the country. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about Colorado?
Well, sure. First of all, it's nice to see all of you. I can tell you I've spent some time in Texas, more than I have in a long time over the last couple of years, and I love Texas. It's a beautiful state, but I'm so glad I don't run elections in Texas. Well, Colorado's model is a lot different. It's a lot more simple. It's a lot more straightforward. The parties really don't have much of a say over anything. They nominate their candidates through their own internal processes to the primary election ballot, and then once they do that, they're out of the way. And then it becomes the role of the clerk and recorders in the Secretary of State's office, who have jurisdiction over those elections, which is a lot easier. If it was another way around, or if the party wanted to run their election, I would be like, that's fine. You guys pay for it. You do it. You do everything else, and then we'll focus on other stuff while you're doing that. Because, again, just the more that I learn about it, again, as Bill said, I have so much respect and admiration for you guys, because you have to deal with a lot of curveballs and a lot of challenges that, quite frankly, I can't think of another state in the country that has some of the challenges that you guys do, especially around your primaries.
In both of your states, and to the degree you know other states as well, we talked about the issues of runoffs here in Texas. Do your states have runoffs as a plurality vote winner in the primary? Can you talk a little bit about the advantages one way or the other?
Colorado, we don't have a runoff, and so the way that our system works is we still have a semi-open primary. So that means Republicans get a ballot with just Republican candidates on it. Democrats get the ballot with just Democrats. But unaffiliateds, our primaries went to semi-open back in 2018 through a citizen initiative that was on the ballot in 2016. And so unaffiliateds get to vote in either party's primary without declaring a party. The way that we do that now in an all-mail ballot delivery state is that unaffiliateds will get mailed both the D and the U ballot, or excuse me, the D and the R ballot. They have to choose one and send one back. And so that creates some complexities too. What we've seen, especially the first time we did it, we saw about 3% of people send back both ballots the first time. And if they do that, neither ballot counts. So we've done a lot of education, but what's interesting, just in 2024, we have a lot of new clerks since 2018 when we first did it, and we didn't do an effective job at the association, quite frankly, telling people, hey, make sure in the new clerks, make sure you're communicating about this one particular piece, and that rejection rate for 2 ballots went up a little bit for the first time since 2018. So now we're focusing on that, making sure people communicate about that so people only send 1 ballot back.
So similar, but different in some ways in Arizona. First of all, we don't have runoffs. We had a runoff in the general election, like in the 90s, because we had a guy who ended up being elected. I don't know if you ever heard of him, named Evan Meekum. He was elected with 37% of the vote. It was a disaster. They instituted a runoff, did it for like 2 years, and then they got rid of it. So no runoffs. I mean, that does create some political issues. I think, again, you can have someone winning with a very small percentage of the vote in a primary, which almost always is the most extreme, frankly, ideologically. But from an election administrator perspective, we don't have to deal with the runoffs. Also, semi-open primaries. So again, Republicans, vote in the Republican primary. Democrats do. Independents can request one ballot or the other, but we do not. That's the difference. We do not send independents both ballots. That's not how it works in the mail.
Well, and in both your states, even though they're primarily mail, like much 85, 90% mail, offer robust in-person voting opportunities for voters who want to. And so if you vote in person, you declare at that point and you get the ballot you requested, right?
That's right. Yeah, we have in Maricopa County, we like to say, we have about the most option. It's Burger King, have it your way in Maricopa County. You want to vote early in person, we got you covered. You want to vote by mail, you can do that. You want to get that ballot at home and hold on to it until Election Day and drop it off at one of our vote centers, and that's real popular. We had over 200,000 people do that in Maricopa County in 22 and 24. Or if you want to do the good old-fashioned, like about 15% of them do, and show up on Election Day, you can do that too.
Yeah, we're very similar. Our mail ballot return rate, though, is much higher. In a primary, it'll be about 99% of those who cast a ballot cast their mail ballot. Now, what's interesting is about 80% of those will take it to a drop box. They won't actually put it in the mail. So very similar to your vote center drop-offs there. But our folks love to vote by mail ballot.
And that's something we see nationwide, particularly in states that have very large numbers of mail ballots, that we're now at the point, and these are predominantly Western states, but they're Western states that range from California to Utah on the political spectrum. That we see a majority of votes being returned by Dropbox or dropped off in person by those voters. It's with mail voting in particular, and this is something. Well, first I should say you shouldn't feel that special that you offer the Burger King "Have It Your Way" bill, because every this is something we put out some research on. 47 states offer some form of early in-person voting, plus DC. The only exceptions are Mississippi, Alabama, and New Hampshire. 2/3 of states offer mail voting without an excuse. So in at least 2/3 of the states, everybody has an option. Now, in your states, it's particularly easy to get a mail ballot as opposed to people who have to request it. I think it'd be fair to say Texas does not have a mail voting culture and does not have laws that would facilitate a growth of a mail voting culture. That is, that's not to say that's bad or good, but mail voting is something that happens much less here. And when we're talking about primaries, one of the big challenges is, as long as you've got a semi-closed or semi-open primary, you have to decide how voters get the right ballot that they find of value. And we heard on an earlier panel the growing number of people who are choosing to identify as neither Democrat or Republican. That's just true. We're seeing that more and more. Texas also, unusually, is a state that doesn't have true online voter registration, meaning that the opportunities for voters to declare a party in advance of a primary that might be meaningful for them are much more limited than it might be in other states. And from an election official's perspective, I mean, am I right? All you really want to do is get the right ballot to the right voter. Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing challenge. I mean, are there, from your perspective in your states with how you're doing it and your, quasi, I don't know if we want to call it quasi semi-open primaries, do you think you've made that balance right? Do you think there are ways to improve in Colorado and Arizona?
Well, I mean, I guess I generally have problems with independents. Republican is the largest party, but just barely. I mean, PND, as we call it, PND is very, very close. And there are so many structural barriers to independence. So I don't think, we're hitting it right. But again, that's really more of a policy question than an election administration perspective. Probably from an election administration perspective, we're doing the best that we can. Other than I think we might get into a top 2 primary discussion later. But short of something like that, yeah, I think we're probably doing about the best we could.
For us, I think we're doing the best we can under the current model. One of the big fights during the initiative to go to the semi-open primaries was it's not enough to say that an unaffiliated voter can go in person and get either ballot. But because we are a mail ballot delivery state, they needed to have a ballot mailed to them. Now, the fight after that was, once the initiative passed, the fight became, well, do the parties deserve to know which unaffiliated voters are participating in their primary? And the legislature, one of the rare times that the legislature agreed on anything, both parties said, well, yes, we want to know who's participating in our primary. So then the question is, well, how the heck do we do that? And so that's ultimately how we got to where we're going to send unaffiliated voters both ballots. And then that adds some processing time and complexity when we get those back, and we have to make sure that somebody didn't vote both ballots. And then we have to make sure that, if David's a U in Colorado, that we are able to mark his voter registration record, not just that the ballot was received, but that he voted in the Republican primary. So that adds some time, cost, and complexity. Now, as we may talk about some other things, top 2 and different types of primary changes have been discussed. If we went to a top 2 system, then everybody just gets one ballot. They get the same ballot, and obviously there's a lot more ease from the administration side on that.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a second because, in most states, it's like that. There's either what happens in your 2 states, where people are registered with a party, or a growing number, and sometimes the plurality number is not registered with either party. And then there are the states like Texas, I also think like Georgia, where people don't register with a party, but can request a ballot for either party, and that can easily be part of the voter record. I don't think there's a really good policy reason to go one way or the other, but I could understand the parties and administrators wanting to know if a voter is generally asking for a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot. But let's go to the top 2 primary, which I know you're both familiar with. For those who aren't familiar, the top 2 primary is something that's used in California and Washington State. Washington State was the first state to do it. And it was a response to something Washington State tried many years ago called the blanket primary, where they ran all of the candidates on a single ballot, and the top Democrat and the top Republican vote getter advanced to the general. That was, the Supreme Court ruled that violated the party's First Amendment rights of association. And so the lawmakers in Washington came up with this idea of this top 2 primary, which put everyone on a single ballot, but just advanced the top 2 to the general election. And that has been upheld by the Supreme Court. And now California's adopted it. Now, why did Washington want to go to this blanket primary or then the top 2 primary? Because Washington was one of the first all-mail states. And this problem of identifying who received the right ballot in the mail was an ongoing problem. It still exists for in-person voting, of course, but it's just not quite as big a problem. And I'm sure the election administrators in this room have dealt with, and we know it from the past primary, the confusion and sometimes upset that voters might have about the perceived problems in getting the right ballot at a particular place in time, or a particular procedure that might exist. So Washington was really attuned to this. And this came out in, I'm sure most folks were following the California primary that just occurred. And they have this top two rule. There are a lot of folks who promote the top two primary because they think it will yield outcomes that they like. They're all wrong. The top two primary is very easy to navigate if you're the minority party in any state. The secret to navigating the top two primary is to run very few candidates in the primary, because the majority party will run a bunch. We see this every time. And in that sense, almost all the time, the minority candidate can get, the minority party candidate can get a single candidate into the general. Now, whether they'll win that election is another matter. But one thing it does do is create this uniformity of ballots across a political jurisdiction, where everyone in a particular political jurisdiction receives the very same ballot. Sometimes that ballot's very long. I don't know if you follow the California election, there were 61 candidates for governor. But that's, the winners are clear, and everyone gets the same ballot, so there's no problem. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, since we kind of danced around it?
So a couple of things. Number one, before I was elected to the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, I was on the Phoenix City Council for 7 years. That's how we always ran. There were nonpartisan elections, top two, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it has tended to have some more sort of a need for people to, go towards the middle and do that, and been fairly positive there. I've got to tell you, from a democracy perspective, where you have independents who are becoming the plurality, or they're a very close second. This really seems to address this. I'm very, not to get too philosophical here, but I'm really getting concerned about the fact that this, especially with Gen Z, I'm at, ASU. Gen Z, the numbers are just remarkable. Such a high percentage of them are not identifying with the party. So these people are essentially cut out, and we all know that so many of the important decisions being made in state legislatures and in Congress are being made in these primaries. So you go to top two, again, it's not perfect. It has its own issues. I thought it was actually kind of comical how people were worrying with the governor's race in California that, oh my goodness, these two Republicans could end up being the top two vote getters. In the end, that didn't happen.
Not even close, by the way.
Yeah, not even close.
Much more close that there was going to be two Democrats that advanced, right?
Yeah. But people were talking about it. So it's not perfect, but I think that it addresses this, because if we don't come up with solutions, also in Arizona, if you're I don't know how it is here in Texas, but if you're an independent candidate and you want to qualify for the general, the number of signatures that you have to get is just, it's nearly impossible. This immediately, you go to top two, it immediately addresses that concern. So, we had in 2024 a top two initiative on the ballot. It went down in flames, even though the polling show that people like it, because there was kind of a little ranked choice element to it, because I think they had to put that in there to get the funding, that they needed for the campaign. But then the Republicans and the Democrats both jumped on that and killed it. But it'll be interesting to see if it resurfaces in another initiative in Arizona. I think it probably will in the next few years. But it needs to be, if they wanted to be successful, I think making it a lot more simple, top two, that has a lot more likelihood of success.
Yeah, we're very similar in Colorado. We are over 50% now who are unaffiliated. So they are by far the dominant, I don't want to call them party block, I guess. They're not really a block because there's a lot of diversity inside that. So I'm not quite sure. Designation, I guess, unaffiliated designation. Democrats are just under 25%. Republicans are right around 22.5%. So it's not even close in terms of what that registration looks like. And you're right. So when you talk about people who are going to get to the general election ballot, it doesn't seem right to leave out 50% or more of the voting population. And when the change to our primary law came in 2016, I didn't like it, right? As a Republican, I'm like, well, I think Republicans should choose Republicans. But the dynamics, the realities have changed. And I know a lot of the parties say, well, if we put these rules back in place, people will have to come back to the party. And to me, that is the most tone-deaf thing that you could think, because people are leaving for the parties for a lot of reasons, and it's not because we have semi-open primaries. It's because there's a lot of issues with the parties. So I do think that's one thing. And then Bill also hit on it too. The barrier to entry to get on the ballot varies a lot by states, right? So in California, I think it's a lot easier to get 61 candidates on the ballot for that. Like, holy moly, forget about it, right? In Colorado, you can get on the ballot in two ways. You can go through the party process, through the county assemblies, the state assembly, and then in Colorado, you have to get at least 30% of the votes at the county or state assembly to get onto the ballot. If you get less than 30, but you get more than 10, you still can petition on. And then if you get less than 10, you can't petition on, you're out. But for a lot of candidates now that go the petition route, they don't want to go through the party process. But it is very expensive. Statewide, a friend of mine ran for a statewide office in 2022. I think she had to spend something like $160,000 to get enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. So that barrier to entry is much higher. Now, I think we can have arguments about should it be quite that high, but I know I don't think it's helpful to have 61 candidates on a ballot like that either.
There's probably a happy medium in that, one way or the other. I totally agree.
Maybe 30.
But I mean, that's for Californians. I don't know if anyone else in here, other than myself, has voted in a California election. But the famous 2004 recall election, 2003, 2004, which Arnold Schwarzenegger ran, had nearly 140 candidates, I think, on that ballot. So California has pretty gracious ballot access rules. You made a point just now, and it reminded me of something that was said on the first panel, which was Governor Abbott recently made a point of saying that he wanted to close the primaries further. He wanted to make sure that only Republicans voted in Republican primaries. And it does strike me, and you're both Republicans, that that's almost inadvertently designed to shrink the party in some ways, especially given the reality that more and more people are choosing not to affiliate. Those of us are of a certain age. We grew up knowing what our party identity was. Probably a lot of us in this room knew that we were of a certain party, and we grew up knowing what that party is. We're seeing that much less nowadays. And especially, I know from looking at data from both your states on online voter registration. And by the way, I don't know if how many of you realize this. Again, Texas being an outlier and not having it. Over 40 states have online voter registration now. But the first was Arizona in 2002 under Republican leadership, instituted online voter registration. And one of the things we've seen, and Colorado did it very early as well. It was probably the fourth or fifth state. Yeah, maybe the third state that did it. Washington was the second. And one of the things we've looked at data from that, and you look at the growing number of people who are interacting with voter registration online, and there is an increasing percentage of those who are not declaring a party affiliation, which is just a reality. And this is a reality we've seen now for nearly 20 years, and it's growing.
Yeah, and in fact, if I can just add on that point, David, just so far in 2026, the numbers are unbelievable in Arizona. It's like, I'm gonna get these numbers wrong, but it's something like, 15,000 new registrants that are PND, so independent, like 2,000, 3,000 are no labels. Democrats are like 1,500, and Republicans are actually negative. So this trend is increasing right now, and again, I think just sort of supports the arguments that were made.
Well, in Colorado too, I think there's a mistake by some policy leaders to think, well, we're just seeing a rise in these unaffiliateds or PNDs or whatever it is because of online voter registration or because of automatic voter registration, which we have too. And if people don't select a party, they get automatically put to unaffiliated. But when you look at the voter registration data back in Colorado, in 2004, it was Republicans were the highest party affiliation, then unaffiliateds, and then Democrats. Since that time in 2004, so before online voter registration and before automatic voter registration, which we started in 2017, The U's were growing like this from 2004, well before either of those advancements in election administration. So it's a mistake to think that there are these other things. To me, both parties are whistling Dixie by the graveyard, trying to not to look in the mirror as to why people are fleeing from them.
Yeah, I mean, if you're closing primaries to only those people that current party leadership believes are true Republicans or true Democrats, you're leaving out just the reality of this growing number who are not going to identify this way. And again, you're kind of shrinking the party. And one of the dynamics you have both seen in your states, and which I think is really fascinating, Bill, and you and I were just talking about this, is when you shrink the party, you end up getting kind of candidates that represent more of the extremes of your parties, and you start seeing parties that might otherwise be able to build a center to right or center to left coalition losing general elections to the other party who is kind of seeking to build a bigger. Are you guys? I mean, Bill, maybe you can talk first because this is a huge dynamic in Arizona.
Yeah. So, and actually the thing I failed to mention is the little quirk that we have. So we're semi-open except in the presidential preference election. Then it's closed. And people love that. You know, people love it when they show up to vote.
By the way, I should say even in top 2 states, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a quirk of the Supreme Court decision. In California, only the parties can limit who participates in the presidential primary.
Yeah, so that is, you know, that and that leads to challenges, in fact, in sort of the infamous 2016 presidential preference we had. A lot of people showed up. They had, you know, both sides were open. We had a lot of attention to the Arizona for the primary, and so all these people show up on election day, all these independents, they want to vote, they can't. We end up having 4-hour-long lines, and both our County Recorder in Maricopa County and our Secretary of State were both voted out of office because of that election. So these quirks can have real impacts on election administrators. But David, back to your point, I mean, I couldn't agree more. When you're close, I mean, it is just the ultimate in like they zig and we zag. I mean, clearly this is where the voters want to go. And if you're focused on growing the party, which is what, you know, when I was in politics, that's what we always talked about. You know, that's how you win elections, you grow parties. Closing primaries seems like the worst thing you could do, not only from the just sort of philosophically, this doesn't seem like the right thing democratically, but so many of these things are bad politics too, just like mail-in voting. I mean, in Arizona, it was Republicans who pioneered vote by mail, and Republicans won election after election on the back of vote by mail. And so now to be told, well, no, actually, as a Republican, you shouldn't vote by mail. It's not good politics. And the Republicans have paid the price in Arizona because of it.
Yeah, I mean, in 2022, 2022 was a favorable election for Republicans nationwide. That's normal. The party that holds the White House is usually going to pay some price in a wave election to some degree in the first midterm after. That happened, by the way, that's happened for the last 40 years. The only exception was 2002, which was a year after September 11th. So a favorable election for Republicans. Democrats won all 3 major state constitutional offices in the state of Arizona, which was...
And they were, well, and 2 of the 3 were really close.
Really close.
Really close. So a regular level of vote by mail by Republicans, and they would have won those races.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me, you know, we heard from the last panel, Bridget, Kristen, and Chris, about the challenges they had navigating these kind of arcane legacy rules about Texas primaries that give the parties all of this power. And I remember when I was talking to the media because I had a lot of questions about this and and I knew the work, for instance, Bridget was doing in Williamson County, and all the problems that were perceived were problems that were created, quite frankly, by the parties, and she was trying to mitigate she and her professional staff, but one of the questions that inevitably comes up is, what does this mean for November? And I would say, it means nothing for November, because that problem doesn't exist in a general election in Texas. And it doesn't exist anywhere in a general election in Texas. So if you hide your head in the sand and say we can somehow have Republicans picking Republican candidates, you can't stop all of those undeclared voters or people who might be on the fence who are open to persuasion by either party from showing up in the November election, which is ultimately going to decide who governs. You can control your nominees. You can't control who wins the actual election.
Well, yeah, just one more factor too. That's not unique to Colorado. We're facing it now, but there are other states like this too. The reason why there's so much pressure now to look at other primary methods is because Colorado, as said in 2004, we were a red state. Now we are a pretty deep blue state. And the primary election, I mean, I hate to say this, but the primary election in many ways on the Democratic side is going to be the general election because statewide Republican candidates just aren't competitive. And so now it's really like, well, wait a second. If this somebody of this particular contest and this party is going to be the one who's going to win in November, then damn it, we want to say in who's going to be coming out of that primary. And so again, the practical realities are changing so much. And if we don't adapt to it, it's bad politics and it's bad for our voters who deserve better.
And you see this dynamic in states, and I think Texas is one of them, that are majority, pretty heavily majority one party, right? Although not completely. I mean, I have to remind people all the time, 40% of Californians voted for Donald Trump, 43% of Texans voted for Kamala Harris. But in those kinds of states, you often see people who are in the minority party want to navigate exactly what you're talking about there and try to bring the majority party maybe a little closer away from the extremes. We saw that dynamic in California recently play out. Whether successful or not, I'll leave that to other people's judgment. But I think having that opportunity, and something that strikes me also is how this affects turnout, because we were talking about this in some of the other panels. I just did some quick back of the envelope math. Texas's turnout in March was very high for a primary. But do you know what it was? It's about 21% of eligible voters. I mean, that is high. 4 out of 5 eligible voters didn't show up in March. And that is objectively high. And that's what we see nationwide. I mean, we see turnout around then. Average turnout in a midterm general election, low to mid 40s nationwide. Texas's midterm general election turnout in 2022, 41%. Nationwide was 46%, which was about the second highest we've seen in recent history. Midterm turnout, and the highest midterm turnout we've ever seen in modern American history nationwide was 50%. 1 out of 2 eligible voters didn't show up. That was in 2018. 4 years earlier, it was 36%. Nearly 2 in 3 eligible voters didn't show up. And I think, the more these parties are closed or more the processes can seem confusing or difficult to navigate, the less likely you're going to be engaging some of those people in the primary process, where they can inform perhaps a more competitive general election process, and even majority parties can benefit from that. I mean, that's how majority parties eventually become minority parties, is by not paying attention to that. Arizona, pretty reliably Republican for decades, eventually is now about as close to 50-50 as you can get, right? I mean, you're literally having statewide races decided by 200 votes.
That's right. Yeah. But then yet our legislature, I mean, the Republicans have not given up control in decades. But yet there's enough of this going on, enough sort of McCain Republican is the term. These are the people who have been historically Republicans, but they just can't go along with these more extreme candidates who have been nominated for these statewide races by Republicans.
And as you pointed out, Colorado, which was a swing state presidentially in 2004 and 2008, I mean, it had a Republican Secretary of State in 2018. And now, I mean, does the state Republican Party think they've got a legitimate shot of winning any of the statewide offices?
That's such an interesting question. Rational people would say no, but the state Republican Party isn't rational right now. So,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot about that. I this is. I think these are valid considerations. I know the parties. It is rational for the parties to want to maintain power or increase their power. I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with that. But if they do it in a way that disincentivizes or voter participation, I think ultimately that has a long-term negative effect on their ability to govern and ability to continue to win elections. I mean, again, we talk all the time, and we think things are so set in stone in this country. You know, it was a while ago that Texas was a swing state or a blue state, but it was in most of our lifetimes. Florida is thought to be a hard red state. In 2018, 2 Republican statewide candidates, including Ron DeSantis, won by 0.25% of the vote. I mean, that's how close it was. I mean, these things can change. So, I mean, how long ago did we think Virginia and Colorado were swing states and Florida was a swing state, you know? And now that's moved away. And I think of Arizona and Georgia, which I think are fairly, not exactly similar election systems, but fairly open participation election systems, where the parties are now having to navigate basically kind of a 50-50 system. And it's not always perfect, but it's, I think voters feel empowered.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing. I mean, we kind of, you know, a lot has been said and written about how tough it's been in Arizona and, you know, for elections administrators and all of that. But the reality is, from having the ability to impact national elections, now Arizona is one of about 7 states that people have to come to. So you're running for president, you've got to come there. I mean, these Senate races, every time they're nip and tuck, as well as, you know, these attorney general races are becoming so important now. And that was the one that David referenced, 280 votes, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we'll see. I'm not going to try and predict, but I think again these are going to be very close. So there is an advantage. I know it's hard on the election administrators. We all like blowouts, but from the voter perspective, I think that, you know, it's been good. It's been good for those voters. But what does it really matter if you're a swing state if you don't get to vote in the primary, you know, when most of these decisions are being made? And that's where I go back to the presidential preference election. I mean, it just seems to me fundamentally wrong that a party can prohibit anyone from outside the party from voting in the primary. And let's say I'm an independent, I'm paying for it. It's my tax dollars that are paying to run this election. That seems fundamentally
So I mentioned
wrong.
the top 2 primary in California and how they don't do that in the presidential primary because of the federal constitutional requirements. But the parties can choose to allow non-party members to participate in the primary, and the Democratic Party in California has done that, and they allow all the undeclared and others to vote in the Democratic primary if they choose. They can only vote in one primary, obviously, but if they choose, that's the primary they vote in. And Republicans have locked it down so only registered Republicans can win. So who's winning the California Democratic primary and California's electoral votes every time? I mean, it's the Democrats, even though they have opened it up. Go ahead.
There's one caveat to the Colorado law too, where a party can opt out of this open primary system if they get, I think it's 75% of the state central committee to vote to opt out of the sending ballots to unaffiliated. But what that means is that they would have to run their own primary. County clerks would not have to do that. So again, trying to lock it down even further, then the nomination process would likely only be through the assemblies, the assembly process. So not only, and there's a faction of the Republican Party in Colorado that is actively driving for this and thinks they have a good shot to get it the next time around. So not only are they trying to disenfranchise unaffiliated voters from participating, but the vast majority of Republicans from participating in the primary too.
I mean, just can you imagine, especially the election administrators in here, for a political party to voluntarily choose to say, we don't want to use any of your expertise or professionalism or equipment. We're going to do it on our own. I mean, hell, this has happened here in Texas. It's happened in a couple other places. There are places where the parties have decided they're going to hand count on their own, right? They can't even count the ballots that they've been handed from professionals who knew how to do that. It is really hard to run elections. And yet there are, I mean, we live in a world, and this is a good segue to my next conversation, where so much disinformation is fueling so many of these policy discussions. At some point, I do want to get to, you two personally have dealt with that in some ways. Bridget talked about what she was dealing with, and I know you were not alone, Bridget, in what you were dealing with, the police protection and other things. But in the first panel, there was a discussion of what we could do to kind of address concerns people have about the integrity of our elections. And I'm going to take a point of privilege here for a second to talk about California, because California was mentioned. I'll just say I'm a Californian originally, so I'm going to be a little bit protective of my home state. I bet you all think, I even think it, that California took too long to count the votes. How many counties in here in Texas were still counting votes a week after the election? You all were, in some way. Provisionals, military, maybe some late arriving mail. I mean, you all were counting them. But we knew who won. You weren't done counting ballots. It's just people thought you were done counting ballots, right? On election night, in the primary, California's first election night report, I was just out there last week, they reported out 5.1 million ballots. That is more ballots than were cast in 40 states in any election ever on election night. They had millions of ballots that were delivered on election day, mail ballots. You both know this from personal experience. You can't pre-process a ballot you don't have. You can't review it and validate and do all of the work you have to do. So that gets started at best on Wednesday. This is what your colleagues were doing in California. They were doing a great job, by the way, under the laws that they had. They have a lot more mail ballots than you do. That's the way California chooses to do it. You can have a really good discussion about whether that's the right way or not. But that's the way we knew it was going to be. And so California wasn't taking a long time counting ballots. The only problem that was going on in California was that they have a ton of ballots. Only state bigger than Texas. 2, a lot of those ballots were dropped off at the last minute. And 3, some of the margins were really narrow. You can't do anything about any of those things. And when the margins are narrow, people think you're not counting ballots fast enough. If you have the Arizona Attorney General's race, it doesn't matter how fast you're counting ballots. You're counting the very last ballot before the media calls the race. And so this is one of the challenges that we have in educating our lawmakers, our public about this, because it is really incumbent upon all of us working in the space not to create election policy based on conspiracy theories, to be based on actual policy. I think both your states have actually done a really good job with that, even though you've been through the ringer on some of that. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing in your states right now as Texas is considering changes to election policy?
Yeah, so this is, I think David put it very well. And, as a professor who teaches American government, we talk about federalism. And to me, elections are one of the best examples of federalism. But as has been, said over and over again, we don't teach young people civics the way that we used to. And so people don't understand that. So, that would be first and foremost for 2 reasons. Number one, they need to understand, don't look at California or don't look at Georgia. I can't tell you, we literally have 2 things in Arizona. One, we had a committee in the Arizona legislature to make our elections more like Florida's. Literally, that was the title of it. And then on Thursday of last week, the legislature just approved a referendum to go on the ballot that says to make our elections more like Florida. We're all different, and so we need.
And by the way, the people who are doing that don't actually know how Florida elections are run.
No, they don't. Yeah, they don't.
It's a talking point, right?
And to David's point, they call those races so. They have made changes, and again, we can have a debate over how we can speed things up. But the reality is, most of the races aren't close anymore, and our races are close. We know that. Time and time again. So that's number one. Number two, I heard someone use the term enthusiast in the last panel. For those enthusiasts out there, for those who are concerned about a cabal of folks who are manipulating all of our elections, they should love the federalism of our elections. They should love and I talk about this all the time. I'm like, okay, so again, if the 2020 election was rigged, you understand how many of thousands of people across this country had to be in cahoots to do this, and not just any people, Republicans. Thousands of Republicans to make sure that the Republican president wasn't reelected. So I think, as we lean into those two things, that helps. But I give another thing that we hear a lot of these days is, local journalism is dead. People are just on their phones. I can tell you, in Arizona anyway, from 2020 through the current date, the number of journalists who took the time to learn about elections, they met with us, they met with other elections administrators, and told that story time and time again. And then I do have to put in a plug for Maricopa County. As all these conspiracy theories came up, we all had this decision to make. It's like, do we do the ostrich thing, stick our head in the ground, or do we face this stuff head on? We decided to face it head on. So there's still a website, you can go check it out, called justthefacts.vote. And so Maricopa County now, for years, as these kooky, conspiracies come up of 50,000 ballots being flown in from China in 2020 and, inserted into our Maricopa County Tabulation Center. As each one of these things came up, we would add the response to it. And, how much does it move the needle? I don't know exactly. But I think it has moved it enough to really have an impact in some of these statewide offices. And so I know one thing, though, if you don't push back, if you don't put the facts out there, people definitely won't find them out there.
I just want to say two quick things and go to Matt on this. First, that justthefacts.vote website that was created by the Maricopa County Board, the left-wing Maricopa County Board, was made up of 4 out of 5 Republicans then and now. And secondly, on your point, Bill, about local journalism, I think Colorado and Arizona are both examples of states that have some really amazing local journalists who have stayed on these issues. But I also want to give a shout out. That's something Texas has. Not every state has that. Not just because Texas Tribune has been a partner here, but Texas Tribune is a wonderful resource for unbiased news that's local to Texas, that tells the real facts. There are vote beat reporters on the election issues that do the same here. I think Texas, there are many states that would love to have invested, informed local journalists like Texas does, and that's what gives me a lot of hope about Texas. Matt, did you want to talk a little bit about?
Sure. Colorado is unique. It's kind of strange. We aren't, as I mentioned earlier, we are deep blue state. We are not a swing state at all, certainly on statewide or federal contests like that. And for some reason, we are one of the center spokes in the wheel for election denialism or enthusiasm. I try to make sense of it. Some days is it as simple as, we have too much weed and too high altitude? Like the two don't match? Like, I don't quite get that. But a lot of the Dominion garbage started in Colorado. Mike Lindell's Cause of America, at least at one point, the person running that, I don't know if he still is, but it's from Colorado. There's a lot of this going on there, and we have found much like in that your guys' website's fantastic. We found that you can. The initial reaction after 2020 was kind of go into the fetal position and be like, oh my gosh, we're getting beat up by everybody, but when you're not aggressively participating in the public square, all people are hearing is one side. And so we started getting much more aggressive in our approach, and we're we're always evolving. David and I were just talking about this. How do you message? Why do people believe the way they do? Some people just think, society at whole is being stolen from them. And so elections, it's easy to manipulate people through that lens. I will say I found over the last 6 years, it's far easier to manipulate people than voting systems. But you have to be able to speak to what's happened, why it's happened. If a mistake happens, you have to own that. And you can't try to hide it and push it under the rug. You have to say, this is what happened. This is why it happened. This is how we're going to fix it. This is how it'll never happen again. So you just have to be open and upfront and honest about it. But again, not participating is not really an option.
I mean, I think this is such a huge point. And it's something that I think you might be dealing with here in Texas more over the next several years. Chasing trust is really difficult. It's like trying to grab a cloud. I mean, you just don't know what's going to have an effect on trust. While there is a heavily invested and profiting economy of grift out there that all they're doing, you guys are trying to run elections every day in addition to educating your voters and instilling trust and all of that. And yet there's an economy of grift out there that their 24/7 job is just to tear down the American experiment. Is just to constantly make Americans feel as if there's this cabal of Americans, half of all Americans are their enemies, and they're using language that is almost identical to the language of our foreign adversaries, and we've seen a lot of documentation of this. It is just going to be really difficult to do. And that is why we normally frame, when we've talked about these discussions on trustworthiness, not trust. I mean, there are valid discussions about how much mail voting should there be, how much early voting should there be, how can we make voter registration more accessible, and also ensure at the core that all eligible voters can vote in our elections, but only eligible voters can vote in our elections, which is what I know all of you do every single day. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think two mistakes that I've seen election officials make, including myself and our team in Colorado at times, right, is thinking there's no hope, right? So we know there are people who are either leading the grift, or there are some people that, Jesus Christ could come down himself and they wouldn't believe him. Right? But then there are others, I like to call them the opportunity group. They may be really cynical. They may not trust you, but they're open to a conversation. And clerks in Colorado have had a lot of success inviting these people in to be election judges. And at the end of the election, if they walk out saying, well, at least I trusted in my county, well, then that's a great thing, right? So, and then you can start to build trust, and they can be ambassadors in your community for that. I forgot my second point. I'll come back.
I'm sure it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So, but on this point of trust, we did a survey of about 1,200 voters, Arizona voters, at the end of 2025. And we found, you look at the top line is great. It's like 2/3 of Arizona voters trust in elections. They, as you go more to the local level, they trust those local election workers the most, and then it goes down from there. But then you start to dig down in this a little bit, and it is a stark difference. Democrats are off the chart, like 90%. So what does that mean? It means Republicans, a razor thin majority of Republicans trust in elections.
Yeah.
That is unsustainable.
And
that's why we have to keep this.
No, back to the trust versus trustworthiness point. Kristen's voters trust her. They should trust her. They trust Bridget a little bit less. They trust the entire state of Texas a little bit less than that. And they trust Colorado and Arizona and every other state much, much less. And as you get separated, that's because your voters know you, they know their processes. We know this from data. The data is really good. It is easier to vote than ever before in the United States. It is easier to register. It is easier to cast your ballot than ever before. Our elections are more trustworthy. We have paper ballots everywhere except Louisiana. They're going to move there eventually. And we audit those ballots everywhere. When voters actually experience it, they come away think that was pretty good. We even know that almost every voter in the United States waits less than 30 minutes to cast a ballot in line. Like, that's amazing. And yet, so they experience that, but then this economy of grift that I talk about leverages their distrust in the outcomes, their disappointment in the outcomes, to make them distrust, if they're here in Texas, distrust Colorado and Arizona and other states, and vice versa. And I remember talking about election officials who've been threatened, for instance, in Arizona. And if you look at the indictments that were brought, they were all from out of state. And it is just an ongoing challenge that you all face. You both personally had to face it. Your colleagues and your members had to face it. We see some of it happening here. One thing I know you're all preparing for in your mind is there might be closer statewide elections than Texas has been experiencing recently this year. That's just a reality. And there will be grifters and losing candidates who seek to leverage that for their own personal gain, for profit. Which means the pressure on the 254 counties in Texas getting it right is going to be more than ever before. I mean, we're going to be there to help. I mean, we're going to be there to help as much as possible, educate the voters, educate citizens and lawmakers to contextualize this. I think you all know about our Election Official Legal Defense Network, which provides legal assistance if you ever need it or advice because of something related to your official duties. But it's just a reality in the United States now. I mean, even states like Colorado, which aren't close, are seeing that, to a high degree where, one of the things, back to your conspiracy point, Bill, this idea that the 2020 election was stolen, at its core, putting aside all of the ridiculous individual conspiracy theories, bamboo ballots and Italian satellites and German servers and dead Venezuelan dictators, at its core, you have to believe that the sitting U.S. president, who had total control of the federal government, lacked the power against a Democratic Party that was out of power to form a conspiracy of millions to steal that election in 2020, and no one was talking about it. And then 4 years later, when that same Democratic Party held every lever of power in Washington, they forgot to do it again. That's at its core what this is all about. And so that's why these grifters have to work so hard, because our decentralized elections are a strength. The federalism is a strength, which is why it's been so troubling for me to see states that I think normally would embrace federalism say, well, we happen to agree with this president, so we'll cede this power to the president. They might not like it when another person is sitting behind the resolute desk. And we've seen things like, of all the election officials, the hundreds of thousands of election officials throughout this country, I can count the number of election officials who corrupted themselves and succumbed to this on one hand. One hand. And one of them, the most prominent one, was in your state, Matt.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. I mean, and became a cause celeb. I mean, there's going to be pressure on you, and one of the reasons we hold these things, yes, we want to inform discussions about primaries, but also just like there's a whole network of people who are out there wanting to support you, who don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat, who don't care who wins the elections in your state as long as it represents the will of the voters. And that's all that matters. And by the way, these two are some of the best examples of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, anyone ever wants to talk, I'm kind of famous or infamous for just laying it all out there, and what I went through and what our family went through, and what I was speaking to the municipal clerks in Arizona last week, and I'm like, people who are in elections, it's not about us, right? That's kind of why it's about the system, it's about being in the background, and that's great, and that's the way it should be, but we can't forget about ourselves. And it's a hard job just normally, but in this environment, it's impossible. And if you don't take the time to take care of yourself, however that is, if it's meditation, therapy, prayer, hitting a little white golf ball, whatever it is, happy hour, happy hour, you've got to do it. And if you ever want to talk to somebody who's kind of been there, different. I know every state is different. I would absolutely be happy to do that. And I hope that, frankly, that you don't end up with an extremely close race, because in this environment, I mean, we just saw in California, the playbook has not been thrown out. The playbook is just being refreshed, unfortunately. So, and I know you all know that, and we just got to be ready for it.
We pray for wide margins and no lines.
That's
right?
it. That's it.
I'd like to say too, I agree. Just same as Bill, I'm happy to connect with any of you to talk about anything. I also want to say how good it is, how great it is to see you guys now building a stronger association with Chris and Kristen. I can tell you in Colorado, even before I was in this role now when I was a clerk, having a strong association that, look, there's very few people in Texas who know what you guys go through day in and day out. And being able to come closer together through an association where you can, quite frankly, trauma bond and talk about some of these things that you've been through. Look, when you're in your office Saturday night before Election Day and it's lonely and everybody else is out partying, there's some people around the state who are doing the same thing as you, and the association helps build those bonds. So it's really, really heartening to see that you guys coming together in that way, and just realizing the strength that can come from being close together like that.
Particularly across party lines, which your
Yes.
states are both really good examples of, because the work, again, we work with election officials all over the country, as do you. The election officials all over the country do not see themselves as D's or R's. I mean, they see each other as fellow professionals, and my favorite thing, some of you I'm seeing for the first time, some of you have met before, but if you ask most election officials in the country how they got into the work of election administration, almost all of them will say by accident. They got in there by accident. They didn't go to college thinking one day I will be a clerk or an election administrator. They go to college. They go to college. They find a job, and those who are still in it found a calling and a community. And I mean, again, you used to be a Republican election protection attorney working for the party. It's remarkable how this community can forge these bonds.
But I will give a little silver lining to this, and I know this is a bit self-interested since we have the Mechanics of Democracy Laboratory at ASU, but because of everything that's happened in the last 6 years or so, young people now, not all of them, but a fair number of young people actually know that election administration is a job. They've heard your stories, and they're coming to me. They know we've got this. This is cool. I want to do this. So we're actually placing graduate students and undergraduate students in Maricopa County and the neighboring county, Pinal County, where they're going to be working 20 hours a week. And not only are students coming, but I'm actually finding some of our brightest students are interested in election administration. So someday, David, that story may be a thing of the past. That's certainly how it has been. But I think, because I am an optimist, I think that there is a silver lining that we're seeing developing out of this.
Okay, so you're seeing why this is the last panel before the happy hour. But we're going to go to the Q&A period. These guys are going to stay up here. We're going to be happy to. We've got a few questions that came in through the QR code. I think you can still submit them, right, Sarah? Or you could raise your hand at some point. But Sarah, are you gonna start?
Yeah, is the mic on? Okay. Yes, I'll read the questions. If for some reason you have time or something didn't get addressed, you're welcome to come up. But I have 15 at least at this point, so we may run out of time and not get to them all. So I apologize, but I'll start first. And then happy hour, yes. The reward at the end or drinks, free drinks.
Next time we should do Q&A at happy hour.
Yeah. We'll just continue the conversation.
What do you mean next time?
No, right.
Does a top 2 primary structure increase primary turnout? How do you think implementing the California half-open primary, R's closed, D's open, would impact elections in Texas?
I guess I'll take that first. I should start off by saying I am highly skeptical of almost any intervention that's designed to increase turnout. Because there are about 1,000 factors that can affect turnout one way or the other. And if it doesn't increase turnout, it might still be a good idea. And if it does increase turnout, it might be for another reason entirely. But all that said, it does increase kind of the threshold for turning out, because those voters we were talking about who might be unaffiliated don't have a barrier to participation. But I think that baseline doesn't necessarily create a huge, turnout opportunity. You're not going to be reaching general election levels of turnout in a primary, but it's possible you're going to engage with voters that if you're in either party, you're going to be able to continue to engage with and drive them out to a general.
Okay.
That's right. All right. That's right.
This next question is for Matt. How do you affiliate an unaffiliated voter to the party's primary ballot they mailed back and still maintain ballot secrecy? Don't you have to separate the ballot from the envelope/voter into first?
Yes, that's such a great question. Such an election nerd geek question too. I love that. So we have in Colorado what's called it's called the poker table. And so we get the ballots in there. Well, and some counties have kind of moved beyond it, but we separate ballots. D's, R's, U's. When we get the U ballot up, we will turn the ballot face down. And this is after signature verification, after all the eligibility checks have happened. We'll turn the ballot face down, separate the ballot from the envelope so I can't see that it's David's ballot that we're pulling out of. The entire batch is face down, so the name is facing down. And then after that, those envelopes will be taken over to a different part of the processing area, where at that point in time, we will say DR, DR, DR. We'll give them the credit for whatever party they voted in.
Can I ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
to that? The D and the R ballots are separate pieces of paper.
Correct. Correct.
It is not secret as to whether someone requested a D or an R ballot, correct?
To whether they voted a D or R ballot.
Right,
Correct.
right. I'm
Correct.
sorry, voted the D or the
Correct.
R. And I don't know that that bothers me from a secrecy perspective. I mean, basically everyone declares a party in a primary one way or the other.
Right.
And that, to my knowledge, is public everywhere. Just what their actual vote was on that ballot should remain secret.
Right.
Okay.
No, but it is a great question. We do everything we can to protect the secret ballot for voters that way.
Okay, thank you. Regarding voters randomly guessing in low information primary elections, do other states see this problem too? If not, how do they combat it?
Do you want me to take this first? Okay. So I think it's fair to say that the longer the ballot, the more the problem with what we call roll-off is, that down ballot will see people abstaining from races. This has been an ongoing discussion because we're seeing a movement towards consolidating more elections into single election dates. So the local elections are now consolidated with statewide to increase turnout. And by the way, that does increase turnout in terms of ballots returned because you see higher turnout in statewide than you do locals. But you'd also see an increase in that roll-off. And so to answer the question, I think every state sees that to some degree. I think every state would also agree, especially on what we call lower salience elections, races, contests that people aren't as familiar with, and nonpartisan races where there's partisanship, whether it's good or bad, it does act as kind of an immediate proxy for some voters to say, I'm going to lean towards or against this person one way or the other. So you might see fewer people vote in those elections. It's an ongoing problem. I mean, I've been working on voter information for a long, long time. I don't know, those of us in this room, I'm guessing we're all the crawl over broken glass to vote in a special election for dog catcher type people. I have sat in my car on my phone reading up everything I could find on someone down ballot in a Board of Education race because I realized I hadn't done it before. I'm guessing we'll all do that. Those of us in this room are 10% of the American population.
What are your thoughts on how much campaign money affects outcomes of elections? General assumption is that the more money spent, the more likely someone is going to win.
I mean, that's what you would think, but that's not necessarily the case. But I do think this issue of money in politics, I mean, and you're starting to see it now. I mean, I think this is a huge issue. And this is a Republican, right? As a Republican, I'm saying this. I think we are hitting that tipping point now where the party that sort of harnesses this, so I'm talking more politics here than elections administration, but I think that the party that sort of harnesses this issue and says, look, we're going to push back on this is going to be successful. I mean, we're at a point now where the numbers are just absurd. People can't even begin to understand it. You're seeing it within both parties, I think, where this populist sort of pushing back on campaign, these huge amounts being spent is going to be successful. But then how do you do, but then then you get back to the Cold War days, right? It's like, who's going to unilaterally disarm? I mean, that's going to be tricky, but somebody who does it, and I think somebody's going to do it in the right way. And I think independents are in that mix there too. I think there's somebody's going to figure this equation out because we are so out of whack. So many people are disconnected from our politics, and probably Gen Z and millennials in the mix there too. I'm not smart enough to figure it out, but somebody's going to.
I'll just say really quickly, I think based on the numbers I have seen, Vice President Harris had more money spent in her favor than President Trump did in 2024. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have a bad effect or it has a good effect or vice versa. It's just factually speaking, I don't think it's as simple as more money, more wins.
What do you think impact will be on midterms after SOS Jane Nelson steps down?
I mean, I think I'll just say this was alluded to a little bit earlier. I think in the maybe in the other panel as well. Voter confusion. Change always has a cost, and that cost is voter confusion. Even good change can have a cost. That's why it's really important when you institute changes, I think we talked about this a little bit, phasing them in over time, making sure you have enough time to educate voters and do the kinds of things necessary to minimize that cost. I think, in my view, I think Secretary Nelson has been a stabilizing force. I think she's held this office longer than many of her predecessors. I think the staff in that office are professionals, and even as Texas is incredibly complicated, 254 counties, a secretary's office that is designed, it is one of the weaker secretary's offices in the country. That is not a criticism of the person who sits in that office. It is designed to be a weaker office. It is an appointed position, whereas most are elected. It has fewer powers. I think she's done a really good job, and I think it's going to be a challenge for her successor to continue that stability with little time. But I'll also say I'm not going to assume it's going to get worse. I think it could very well be that her successor comes in and works hard to maintain the level of trust that exists and build upon it, and recognizes that his or her job is to serve the voters of Texas, not to serve a political party. And that's what we see. There are exceptions, but most secretaries of state, I don't care what their political party is, they've been doing that.
Yeah, I would also add, the concern that I have is specifically, David's right in terms of voters and impact. My concern is specifically what it means for you guys and last minute changes. You guys have to cash checks that other people write, and sometimes they cash and sometimes they're bad checks. You know that. And so, and again, I think this is where a strong association can help. Reading the tea leaves. What can possibly happen? What are you hearing may happen? If there's legislative things that may or may not go into effect between now and the election. The key now is trying to identify those and then preparing for them. Even if there's a small likelihood that it can happen, you'll be like, oh, no, they're not going to do that. You still need, just like election security, we'll say this all the time on election security stuff too. You prepare for anything. Don't summarily dismiss anything, right? So even if you think there's a change that's out there legislatively that may not happen, prepare like it is going to happen. It'll make your jobs easier, and then it'll make the experience better for the voter in the long run too.
Can I just add one thing, because it's something I often talk to secretaries of state. I work with them quite a bit, and I often host meetings for new secretaries of state. One of the things I always tell them is, regardless of what your relative responsibilities are in your state, regardless of the fact that secretaries of state don't run elections, that's not what they do. They oversee them as chief election officer. The election administrators in the counties and local level run the elections. The fact is, if something goes wrong in a county or local level, the Secretary of State's going to be blamed for it. And when it goes right, they're going to get more credit than they possibly deserve, probably deserve. But that means that their fates are tied to the county and local election administrators' fate. They should be incredibly invested in your success. And most secretaries really take that to heart and build strong communication and strong processes and clear standards and take feedback along those lines. Because I don't care what state you're in, people don't always understand exactly what the relative and very nuts and bolts roles of all the election officials are. But the Secretary of State, especially now, is going to get blamed or credited with stuff probably more than they deserve.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, in Arizona, Katie Hobbs, who's frankly, a liberal Democrat from Central Phoenix, got elected governor because of she was seen as defending that 2020 election. So it is a vitally important role.
I have one more question and then a follow-up question, probably for Chris, Bridget, and Kristen. And I was going to ask Emily if she could retrieve the microphone from David to get to Chris after this next question. Okay. With Governor Abbott and the Texas GOP actively pushing to require party registration and close the state's primary system, we are looking at a fundamental shift in how Texas votes in the next cycle. Given the most races are effectively decided in the primary, where turnout is already very low, how do you see this change impacting participation? Specifically, how might closed primaries alter lawmakers' governing incentives? What hard operational burdens or hidden costs will county election administrators face in implementing it? And how does this trend compare with primary models nationwide? Yes.
All credit for that. I mean, that was. I hope you weren't typing that on your phone. I'll just say, the more your primary represents a shrinking part of the overall general electorate, the more you run the risk of electing a candidate that's responsive to that shrinking portion of your heavily partisan electorate, who's not going to be appealing to the broader general electorate. And Arizona doesn't have closed primaries, but I think Arizona is kind of exhibit A for that in many ways. And yet you see, other states. So Georgia has a quasi-open primary. You request a ballot. You don't have party registration, and not all the time, but oftentimes, what they have seen is they're very diverse Republican and Democratic parties, which don't represent just one part of the spectrum, kind of work things out. And you've seen Republicans consistently win statewide offices in their constitutional roles when Democrats are winning Senate seats and occasionally winning presidential elections. And I think that probably accurately reflects what Georgia voters want.
It's also really interesting to me, the argument here in Texas, right? Federalism, it's great, perspectives, everything. The argument here in Texas is, should we close the primaries and, let's register by party. In Colorado, a lot more Republicans are talking about getting rid of party registration, thinking that it may make Republicans more competitive if there's no registration and people just have to consider things on the issues, whether or not that's true or not. I'm not here to debate that, but it's just interesting how the perspective is there.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I would say is we try and be voter-centric here. And from the voters' perspective, if this goes through, I mean, people aren't hanging on the every word of the governor and the legislature. A lot of them aren't going to know that, and then they're going to show up, and they're going to try and vote next time, and they're going to be frustrated. And now that's even more, sort of cynicism in the system. So, and I think when that happens, they're likely to punish the party in power. So I go back to my earlier point. I don't think it's good politics.
You call your county offices, by the way, complaining. I mean, or complain at polling places. And by the way, this is not just one party that does this. I mean, Oregon implemented automatic voter registration, and a lot of voters who were registered by automatic voter registration didn't really realize they had been registered and never established a party preference. They're all male. So when they have closed primaries. So when there was a primary election, tens of thousands of people received ballots that they didn't recognize. They didn't know what to do with it. The people they wanted to vote for weren't on that. And who do you think they call? They call their county election official whose return address is on that ballot, right? So it's something that you're going to have to consider.
I would just one more thing too. I to your point, Bill, being bad politics in Colorado, voters drove where our model went, and our politicians were smart enough to get on the train with the voters. So in 1998, we went to no excuse absentee voting. Our numbers skyrocketed, right? So in 2005, we went to a permanent absentee list, meaning you could apply once and get a mail ballot in perpetuity after that. Well, then almost 80% of our voters went there. So then in 2013, we went to all mail ballot delivery because that's where the voters wanted us to go. And so, we try to balance access and integrity. No system is perfect. We're trying to get better every day, just like you guys are trying to get better every day. But it's never wrong to follow where the voters want to go. And the smartest politicians will see that, get on the train, and own it. And that's what we've seen in Colorado.
Go to Chris, Bridget, and Kristen, and I'll let y'all decide how you want to answer. The question is, what would it take for Texas to have an actual nonpartisan voter education program? Things like how to register, what is a primary, et cetera.
I don't think a nonpartisan program is the difficulty. It's the attendance and people to pay attention, right? Just like in school, just like anything else, just like at these things, just whoever's watching it. The people that need to hear it don't come and show up and hear it. I think that's the most difficult thing, right? A little bit Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The people that think they know everything they need to know don't need to show up to these things. So I think from a perspective of the League of Women Voters, the Texas Civil Rights Project, all these nonpartisan groups that are out to try to educate the public do a great job. I think our association is trying to do some of that as well. But again, it is the folks that need to hear it don't usually pay attention to it. And then you get into, the Texas system, with the changes that come about every 2 years, a lot of these low information voters don't pay attention until it's either a midterm or, more importantly, a presidential election. And God knows how many times the laws have changed since the previous presidential election. So I don't think it's hard to implement. It's hard to be super effective in reaching the people it needs to reach. You guys have any other impact on that? No? Good? Look at you.
I will say, just to add on there, one of the things we're trying to look at how we can get to voters and communicate in different ways. We're not the first people to do this, but one of the things we're starting to look at more is, who are, and you guys are going to laugh at me, but I talked to my daughter. Who are the influencers in your community on TikTok or whatever the hell she's on now? And it's trying to find people in your communities who are influencers like that and can weave the messaging into. So we have to be really creative about how we get out there, because Chris is right, we all know it. It's like hitting our head against a brick wall. So we need to change and stop expecting other people to change. Let's go where they're at instead of asking them to come where we're at.
We tried to have an executive board TikTok page, and they didn't go for it. They didn't want to see us dancing. So.
But to Matt's point, in the survey we did at the end of last year, no generations pay attention to social media influencers on elections except Gen Z. They do. So, we can say that's nuts, whatever, but we got to figure that out. They do trust at a higher level, both social media influencers and politicians generally on issues of election administration. So we're going to have to figure out how to harness that in some way.
I just want to say briefly, all of this is good. We should invest as much as we can. We should be, you all are already doing a lot of this work, but have a little grace towards yourselves as well, because you can do everything right and it might not make a difference given the incredible economy of grift that is out there, and that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. And it might not even mean that the elections were narrowly decided. California doesn't have narrowly decided elections, and you've got grift going on there. So we should do as much as we can, but don't get down on yourselves when the conspiracy theories come up anyway.
Thank you. I was not able to get to every single question that was submitted. They were all very good, so thank you all for submitting questions. If we didn't get to anything, please feel free to holler at us. We have a couple more minutes, David, if you have any closing remarks for the day, and then we can head on. Thank you, Chris.
Why don't I leave it to you guys to go first? Do you have any final thoughts?
I want to say, from my experience, I have so much respect for the great work that you guys do. I can't imagine the different types of challenges that you face here in Arizona, but just from our experience and the people back in Arizona, want to thank you all. And unfortunately, we're at sort of the beck and call of the politicians. They don't think about elections administration. It's the rare one that does. But just know that there are a lot of people across this country who really believe in what you do. They appreciate it. And as I'm always talking about with people, it's not robots that run our elections. It's people. It's our neighbors. It's our aunts and uncles. And just thank you, and please thank all the folks in your offices too for all the great work that you do. And it's just wonderful to be here today.
Yeah, I echo those statements a lot. You guys are doing amazing work, and I realize as we talk about this, and I think David has me ready for a double now, saying, doesn't matter, like something bad could still happen. And you know what? That's true. And just being honest, those grifters, they're more sophisticated. They're financially better off than they were 4 years ago. They have a better plan. But you know what? So do you. Right? We as a community are much more resilient than we were in 2020. David says this a lot of, 2020 was the safest and most secure election we've ever had. Then 2022, then 2024, now 2026. You guys are doing an amazing job. So even though it seems like we're up against this tidal wave of crazy, you guys are more prepared. You guys are better off to handle this. Please don't ever lose sight of that. And look around in the men and women in this room who you guys have each other's back. Stay strong. This election this year is going to go really well, and it's going to be because of you guys. So anything we can do to help, please let us know.
I mean, I obviously I echo all of that. Just by being in this room, election officials, concerned citizens, activists, policymakers, policy influencers, you're standing with democracy, you're standing with our processes. I don't know if you ever take a moment to just take a step back from everything you're doing on a daily basis and think about what you all facilitate in our country. We have the most decentralized, complicated election system in the world. Our ballots are longer. We vote every day. We have 10,000 little jurisdictions all over the country. We don't run a national election. In Texas, you don't run a state election. You run 254 little elections. Maybe in Harris County, not so little. The ballots are so complicated. I hear this all the time. France can hand count all of its ballots in one day. Why can't we? Well, because France has one race on that ballot, and the pieces of paper are different colors. Pretty easy to hand count that. If you've got dozens of races on a ballot in hundreds of counties with several different election technologies, where people across the street have a completely different ballot from one another, that's the challenge you guys face in every single election. And that's in the best case circumstance. Then you've got this incredibly complex and seemingly esoteric system with a set of laws, some of which have not been, updated in decades, that's completely imperceptible to the millions of Texans who participate in it. And so when you have very powerful and well-financed forces, some of them from foreign adversaries overseas, telling them they should distrust your work, they say, yeah, why should I trust the work? My candidate didn't win. It's going to continue to create problems. And all we can do is every day continue to make this system as trustworthy as it possibly is. And every day you do that. And I just don't know if you get enough time to sit back for just a second and think about the millions of Texans that you give a voice to, half of whom disagree with your personal politics. And how wonderful that is. I want to end with this. I think Bridget, you might have brought this up. How it used to be kind of a celebration around primary elections, and it wasn't just because of the process. I think sometimes we forget what a celebration our elections are, what a celebration of democracy they are. That there's joy in voting. Sometimes go out to one of your polling places and see, especially early voting. People are choosing to go. One of the lines in the media that I don't see very much anymore, but used to bug the hell out of me, was on the first day of early voting in any state, there'll be long lines. And you'd start hearing complaints about voter suppression because there were long lines at early voting. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is the first day of early voting. Those people are excited. They are choosing to go out there and stand with their community in line. They're turning it into a party. They could come back tomorrow. They could come back on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. and there'll be no lines there. They could find another vote center. They're not. They're choosing to embrace the joy of voting. And so my big message to voters everywhere, and I encourage you to share it, is it's our 250th anniversary. We're seeing very high turnouts in our primary. The highest turnout election we've ever seen in a midterm is 50%. Let's blow that away. Go and find 20, 50, 100 people that you might know, not only in your state, not only of your party. Find some people you disagree with politically and get them to go out and vote with you or wherever they are. Because politicians right now are trying to put their thumb on the scale. Both parties do it. But when they do that, they're basing it on past performance in elections. They're basing it on past turnout and past party behavior. High turnout can blow that away. 53, 54, 55% turnout will blow that away. 60% turnout turns it on its head. And so let's embrace that joy of voting again, because voting should be fun. Voting should be celebrating something, particularly this in our 250th year. Voting with someone that you politically disagree with should be one of the greatest expressions of American democracy you can think of. And so I actually do expect that for all of this, all of the downer talk and all of the challenges you all face, I think at the end of the day, at the end of this year, we're going to have looked at the highest turnout midterm election in American history. And a lot of politicians are going to be going back to the drawing board thinking about how they can respond to the electorate because they had their final say. So with all that, happy hour has started. Thank you all for joining us. Those of you who are watching online, thank you for watching. It is so energizing to be in a room with people who care about democracy this much. So thank you all for the work you do.